just so you know, we do not do this in our day jobs unless asked by some powerful and amazing women like yourselves to do a mantle. We do not do this.
Thank you. Yeah.
Please don't share pictures unless you put that underneath us. So I'm going to kick us off, and I'm thrilled to be here with Thanh. And we're going to talk about what we think we can do to bring male allyship along. I'll talk a little bit about what we think male allyship is. I'll talk a little bit about what my organization does. You saw those data points there. You can see that one of our missions is making data great again for the cause of gender equality. We thought it was first important to talk about what we mean by male allyship and what we're doing here, because I think I'll at least start off by saying I think it's a learning process. I don't think there's when I was a 13-year-old and they give you that "what would you like to do when you grow up" test, there was no male allyship for gender equality on the list of professions. And I still think, folks like Dawn and many others, we're learning together of what does it mean to be in a space like this, to say we're allies, not speaking over instead of, not mansplaining, but learning how to listen, and that very difficult thing of asking for directions, which we try to do now and then. So I'll tell a little bit about how I got into the space and am co-creator and ED of an organization called Promundo. That name comes from a Portuguese contraction of "for the world," and it sounds like we're going to conquer it or something. But we mean by it that gender equality is a good for the world, that we think men need to be part of it, and gender equality needs men, and we think men need gender equality. So that's a little bit of our framing with that grandiose name that sounded good about 25 years ago, when you come up with names for your organization. I got into the space really by no choice. My father was a social worker. His career was dedicated to the care of children who had been abused or neglected. It was mostly about stories of harm done by men to children. And he made it really clear from the earliest ages that I have of who he was, that this is what a good man did, that caring was the verb that he thought most conjugated with being a man. And that contrasted with the world around me, where every friend, girl, or girlfriend had some story of harassment or worse. Freshman year in my big state university in Texas, a group of young men took a young woman to the room. She was drunk, and they had non-consensual sex with her. My university did, the drastic move of, from then on, you had to register the name of who was coming to visit you in your room. Basically nothing else done. I witnessed a school shooting in my high school, a young man who had been years of experiencing bullying, lack of attention, an abusive stepfather who also had guns. All those examples saying there's something up with manhood that didn't jive with the version I had at home. I moved to Brazil to lead a project supported by UNICEF, looking at girls who were being sexually exploited on the streets in Rio de Janeiro and Recife. It didn't take very long to map those stories and to know what led there, and to flip that story around and say the problem happened in the bodies of girls, but it was men's problem. It was the men at the bar paying for sex. And smart women I was working with said, yeah, we know, we call that patriarchy. We knew that. You didn't bring any piece of new. And I said, I know, but what do we do to go upstream from that? How do we go up and say, why are some boys and men raised to think that was okay? And what could we do to take this work? Of course, we need to arrest men who do that. There's probably not enough prison space, and we know all the problems with a prison version of or a justice sector approach. How can we go upstream with this work? Asked that question quite a bit, and I wanted to study that issue, and so I went to work on my doctorate in child development to say, how do we make men and boys so? In that journey, I was accompanied by my Brazilian wife, and that's an important detail because we decided while in Chicago that we would have a child. I was doing my PhD. She was the main breadwinner. And she said once we arrived and we were doing the planning of, what it's going to be to care for a child, and she said, what is this backward country you've brought me to? There is no paid leave guaranteed here. She had 10 weeks under disability, and she said, what kind of country is this that calls childbirth and the care of children a disability? And that I had to depend on having an okay benefit for my job to have 10 weeks off. So in this negotiation, which meant me listening to her about this, it was decided I would be the stay-at-home dad. Mostly full-time for the first year of our daughter's life. And whatever I had as kind of theoretical about men should be allies in this work was, here was the practicum, right, of caring for a young daughter. And I was studying child development, so I thought I knew a lot about it. Well, not so. An amazing, humbling experience to be given lots of instructions for things I thought I knew how to do. Being told by a pediatrician, please tell the mom, because I must not have been able to remember 3 things at the same time. And then as I've told that story to women over the years, and I complained about how the world doesn't really make space for parents of young children, does it? Women said, yeah, well, we might have experienced this for a few decades, thank you very much, that you've also realized what this is. It was out of those experiences that, together with colleagues, I moved back to Brazil, we moved back to Brazil as a family, and that we started Promundo. And what we try to do is a lot of stuff that Dawn was talking about before of how do we have these conversations. We do a lot of work with boys, a program called the Global Boyhood Initiative, and a set of group education activities we do with young men called Manhood 2.0. We have a global campaign that we support called Men Care that has the lofty but we think necessary goal of getting men to do 50% of the hands-on care work, which our data show that we are 92 years away from achieving. So we have a bit, you would say that our metrics for success are not quite what they need to be. And then we also do a lot of work in violence prevention. Again, how do we look upstream? And part of that is around trauma. Understanding, and Dawn said this so eloquently, the way that we make violence in the bodies of boys and men, and how do we break those cycles. We do a lot of this in partnership with governments, UN agencies, corporate sector, and there's a lot still to be done. And we do this work in partnership with women allies and feminist allies. And I think we try to hold ourselves accountable to that space, the space that you all represent. I'm going to stop there, and I want to hang over to Thanh, because we were talking last night about our stories. How did we get here? Would love to hear yours.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's been a long journey for me. But I think, growing up in a small town in Missouri, look, the notion of allyship wasn't there. And really kind of being a young boy and learning the aspects of masculinity there, you're really trying to unlearn a lot of things now, right? So, for me, it took a long time to ultimately get to how the pay equity divide really affected myself personally growing up, my sisters, my spouse. It took time getting into the professional field and working with the data inside a professional company, right? And there I started to realize the true impact of how data can support following the money and the money following the data. So for us and where we come, I was fortunate enough to be a part of the founding HR team along with my co-founder Nancy here at Salesforce. So we were able to really kind of look in the operational side of how businesses really operate, right? And the processes and the programming and the plan design that allowed for this to happen, right? And the reality is, once you dig into that data and you start to expose it, which is why we're here at OpenComp to a certain extent. Now, we're helping our companies figure out how to get better, smarter, faster through intelligent business data. But the reality is all that information around compensation, personnel information helps drive what you guys have all been focused on for so many years. And it has to be exposed, yep. Right? And it's really, we're here to really take this notion of intention and really driving the quantitative data and the output and making, investors and our company builders accountable, right? Because when you show scorecards or you mandate data around this, yeah, something's gonna happen, right? So that's where we're coming. That's where I've kind of dedicated my time, and being somewhat of a data nerd, it's come natural, and the association of the closing the gender divide is just critical as part of what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can't overstate just data in the right hands used for accountability. We do a lot of, you saw some of the stats of data gathering we've done in the US. We do research in other parts of the world. And I think the importance of, once, particularly if we get corporate sectors on board and say, hey, can we do some surveys in your workplace? or if we get governments on board. We do some household surveys that we've done in now about 50 countries on where men are in gender equality. Once data's out, folks feel obligated to act on it. And I do think, a couple of areas where we've used it. One is, you saw a couple of stats there. We've asked men about, in this moment where we are being called, there's a calling out for men's harm. What do you think about it? And the vast majority of men, you'll say, well, yeah, I'm doing my part to call out gender inequality and sexual harassment. And then we ask women in the same settings, how are men doing? And you look at this thing, if Don is using that expression around aspirational masculinities, we would say there's an aspirational gap. Yeah. Men are saying, we want to be allies, and then you look in practice and say, well, where are we doing it? In a closet? Or because women are not seeing it. Non-binary individuals are not seeing it. People of color are not seeing the white allyship that we say, kind of to act politically correct, that is happening. And I think that becomes a very powerful tool to let that moment of silence. Dawn talked about how silence can be how patriarchy covers up, but I think it can also be an uncomfortable moment to say, now would be a good moment to say, you don't know, and you're looking for instructions. And I think as we step into our work, to think in thoughtful ways, to look at lots of men in power at corporations, lots of boys and young men, kind of imagining that they're walking around with a shirt that says awaiting instructions. Yeah. But to assume some goodwill there. And I think, we will flip that phrase around and say we do need to do the calling out, but we also need to be very clear about what the calling in is. What do we need for you? And I'm echoing Dawn's words about that aspiration. So what does that look like at the workplace? One of the things that we'll step into there is the issue of caregiving and who does what at home. The mental load, the physical load, who administers it, is probably up there of the top two causes of why women's work participation and income is not equal to men's. So what do we do? What do we need to do to make that possible? What is the paid leave that we need to offer for the 100 million people in this country who don't have it? And the small percentage of those of us who are middle class and have jobs that offer it? What does that need to look like? How do we do equal leave so that men are doing it and taking it? One of the things that we see when we offer it to men is that they often don't take it. They are worried about, we'll ask them why, financially, will my career suffer? If I take time off, will I look like I'm not the one who's trying to be partner, I'm not trying to get ahead in the organization, I'm not dedicated to my job. And again, we have to ask that phrase, welcome to the world that women have been living for the last decades. So could we not do this together? What kind of changes would it take? I was at the corporation with Cummins, and I can say the name because the CEO is proud to say this. He said, how could I set the message in my workplace that men should take leave and that I ended meetings every day at 4:30 because I needed to be home to relieve the babysitter, who made it clear that if I wasn't there by 5, it was on me. And so I couldn't say, I could blame others, but how could I set a model in the organization that says, I need to do this? On sexual harassment, we've got a lot to do as well. You saw some of the data there on good intentions. We asked men, do you think you would be a good listener? You would know how to respond. 90+% men say, yes, I would know. We ask women in the same settings, half, if that, say that men would know what to do. And I think as we look at what we do as training within organizations, it can't simply be that 45-minute lawyer-given PowerPoint, nothing against the lawyers in the room, that gives you the red light, green light, yellow light, what is harassment. I think men need some basic literacy and consent. That is, let's make that standard. But also to say, we've got to go beyond that. Here's things we need you to do to speak out against sexist language, against the microaggressions that can happen, against our policies at work that don't make equality at all levels and the kind of data gathering that you do around that. So those are really 3 areas that we try to do. How do we get leadership to buy into this, to fill that aspiration gap and say, you believe in it, let's do it? How do we get you to put in place policies around the care work? And how do we make meaningful policies around sexual harassment? How do we make these public conversations? We have the big challenge that of NDAs, which means that we don't end up with the kind of meaningful learning processes when cases happen. And contrary to belief, men can learn. And we can figure out ways that, look, this is what consequences look like. Those departures were related to this. This is what we do as an organization. And the challenge to get organizations to be brave about that as well, to be able to talk about that publicly and make that part of what they do. So yeah, I just talked, some challenges, some opportunities there. Take back to you on some of those.
Look, I think there's, amongst my peers of founders and CEOs and company builders, I think there is fear to expose this data, and they fear that they don't know how to react or respond to it. But I think that's part of the education and normalizing, the data around this. As we think about building companies, I just truly believe that we can affect change because we're making the hires. We can actually make the decision to say, we're going to pay you the same as this male doing the same thing, right? And I think it has to be easy, the processes from which businesses and business leaders, how they access this information. It has to be easy for them. We recently did a survey, and they cited 3 major hindrances. It was resourcing, it was access to data, and buy-in. And the reality is, it's really around that buy-in because we have the data, we have the technology to push it out. Heck, we as a business measure every aspect of our business, from customers to when they're clicking what their response time on an email is, and now we can't do that here, right? It's kind of ridiculous, right? So for us and for me, it's really around normalizing and putting the standard operating instrumentation for business leaders and folks that are responsible for hiring. So when they make that offer, they see the inherent impact within their department and across their organization. And I think more importantly, when you think about the talent side, the source of this, talent needs to demand this type of information because employees walk with their feet, right? And we're seeing it today. And once they're empowered to ask the gender scorecard or ask the diversity scorecard, like, enterprises have to fall in line. They're gonna have to drive to solve that because they're not gonna be competitive. And we get back to, hey, this isn't just feel good anymore. This isn't intention. You can make this extremely competitive, and you can make this a strength for your company through higher offer rates, higher retention, getting better talent. I mean, that is ROI, and that is, profit loss. And we just need to normalize that as a part of building and growing businesses.
Yeah. And I'll push, a little bit back on that. I'm glad to be on stage with a data nerd. This is cool because I cite some data in there too. A lot of corporations are using that. We can retain workers better, and I think the data does show that. We can get the creative talent that we want here. Workers feel more allied with wanting to stay with us and more loyalty to us. But I also think we have to be careful that you as employers have to be genuine about this. We are doing this also because your workers and employees have the inherent dignity of needing to be supported in the care aspects of their lives, and to acknowledge just how much all of us are part workers and part caregivers. That's not an option for us in terms of, and particularly as we look at the numbers around those who are caring for elderly family members or caring for children. Huge number of us now in the sandwich generation that we have both. And so it's not, I do want you to get ahead with it, but I think I also want to see corporations do it because it is what the human beings who work with you deserve. Yeah. It's the inherent dignity that I think employers see through it when it feels like you're doing this because the numbers look better for me. And I do think that's a piece we need to pull in there. And I was going to push a little bit to it, another aspect, not only employers, but also to think in the room, a vast number of you are parents, and I'm guessing a lot of you have sons. A piece that we've been doing of looking at the challenge of how to bring boys into this journey. And I'm also looking at a colleague, Esther Soler from Futures Without Violence, who's here. Great to see you, Esther. Does some fantastic work with boys that has inspired us around the world. We've been talking to parents in several countries about what do they see in their sons and what are they worried about. The vast majority of parents want to see their sons come into a healthier, aspirational idea about manhood, but are particularly frightened about it. If I raise him to be able to show his vulnerability, to ask when he needs help, to seek help when he needs it, he is going to get in trouble at school. He's going to get beat up. He's going to get bullied. The rest of the world, parents believe, and I believe parents are right, is bombarding their sons with other ideas about manhood. How do we empower parents as well so that we can raise our sons to be the best, the most connected, the most caring, the most equity-seeking humans that I believe boys come into the world wanting to be. And a telling piece of this study that we did in listening to boys in several countries was doing a word map of asking boys about what it meant to be a man. And we did this in the US just around the time that COVID was starting with a Republican voting area of the country and a Democrat voting area of the country. And the words were virtually the same. Nobody said to be a tough guy who wore around, whatever, and was ready to beat people up at the drop of a hat. 7, 8, 9-year-old boys all had positive words in there. He's honorable. He looks out for others. He helps at home. The list is there. Our sons, boys come into the world wanting to be connected, relational human beings who want to do well with others and feel when they do well with others. They see when others are bullied. But what happens? They see that if you are bullied, or if you see someone as bullied, you are afraid that if you speak out, the bullying will come back to you, which is the same phrases that we've heard of men in the workplace, of why they don't speak out when they see harassment. You don't want to be that guy, is what they will say. So, just struck by how the child play of boys and how we set it up at school with the male peer groups looks so much like the adult male peer groups that happen in workplaces, and as Don told us, so much that happened in sports places. So that tells us just how much work we have to do. And one of my moonshots, and I would love to hear Thanh talk about his moonshots as we begin to wrap up here, is to say we've done a fantastic initial start to create new spaces for our daughters. As father of a daughter, I'm amazed with, and thrilled by kind of her seeing the world as I can do it, I can go there. I don't think we've done the same to create a space that says, this is the kind of aspirational, healthy version of manhood we want for our sons, and make it safe for them to be in the space, and make it clear that that's what we are looking at them to be, and who we expect of them to be every single day. Tong, that's one of my moonshots.
Yeah.
I want to hear yours.
Look, mine is to close the gap, right, amongst the startups that we work with. So, it's simple. I deeply believe that, a lot of policy work has happened, but we need to extend it, and we can extend it with early entrepreneurs when they're first getting off the ground. That's where they can make the biggest impact. And I think, if we are able to get this mandate towards, at the board level, then the companies are going to have to address it. Right? But right now, there's not enough accountability with the investors and the senior executives to measure this across all companies. And I want to work to standardize that measurement and that instrumentation. So every quarterly board meeting, it's part of your financial review. It's as simple as that, right? And we have to tie, ultimately, tying performance to that, right? We speak about performance and pay all the time. And a lot of times it's lip service. But these metrics can really align to performance. And that's my moonshot in what we're trying to do.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll leave you with two others that kind of men at the, kind of at the end may say, so what can I do here? One thing I'll say is take a look at time. And I think you talked about everything that we can measure, and we now have our lives with a little piece of electronics in our hand all the time that tells us where to be and where we're supposed to be next. The average in the US of about women do 37% more hands-on care work every day than men do on average. None of us are averages, but we're all averages. That means in time use that men need to do about 50 minutes more per day, 50. Multiply that, because some men can do math. Multiply that, that's about 2 weeks of vacation that we get as men, just by the virtue of being born male identified. And that's also a segment that I think men can think about. What would you have to reorient your life that you're doing? Maybe that's not your average. Maybe it's 3 hours that you need to make up for, or 15 minutes, who knows? But that's a pretty reasonable amount of time that we could think about, and what you would have to do to reorient your life to give that much more in terms of care work. Now, that presumes, and you as women have a role there too, that presumes that if he did in a heterosexual household, if he did 50 minutes more, that you would actually do less. And we could talk for hours about that, if that presumption is correct. But that is one moonshot to say, Let us order our lives so that men do half of the care work on the planet at home, paid care work, and the rest.
Here.
And in 24 seconds, if I could, to say the other thing I want men to do is to vote like women. To go for that why can't we pass child care legislation in this moment in our country?
Very true.
So whoever wants to help me do that cause of getting men to vote as if child care is the most important piece of legislation we need to do, I'm with you, and we'll be glad to talk about it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.